Everybody, thank you for joining us for today's panel. It's a pleasure to be here in person for Baltimore Innovation Week 2022. So this panel is Finding the 95%, How Going Global Can Accelerate Your Startup. We're going to hear from three panels today who are going to share their expertise on going global, and we'll have lots of time for question and answers, so please don't be shy and speak up. I'm going to turn this over right now to my friend Jamaica, who's going to moderate our first panel. Sorry, is that not? Okay. Our first panel is a Fireside Chat, my global startup story. So Jamaica, over
Wonderful.
to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So thank you to Paul and the U.S. Commercial Service today for organizing these three panels. As Paul mentioned, my name is Jamaica Gale. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Innovation Forum based in D.C. And so the goal of the Global Innovation Forum is to connect small businesses with the resources that they need to succeed in the global marketplace. So today's conversation with these two small businesses is very aligned with that mission. The purpose of just this discussion is to hear directly from small businesses about how they are engaging in global markets, just hear their experiences and some lessons learned and hopefully some best practices. So with me today, I have Sanjay Kalasa from Adashi Systems, as well as Brandon Dotton-Haley of Savani Labs. So I'm going to turn to each of you just for a little bit more about just starting with your businesses, what you do, your mission. Brandon, can I turn to you first? Or no, actually, the person with the mic.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So Adashi Systems is an ETC-based company. We're actually right over there. We've been here for, I think, 9 years, if I remember correctly. We do public safety software, which is, if you think about it, it's a very niche market. We sell software and services to police and fire departments around the world. Very, very niche. We probably don't even know that there's software running on fire trucks and police cars, but there is, and we do that.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brandon Dotton-Haley from Savani Labs, and we create medical devices and software that are designed to listen to body sounds, track trends, just like a doctor would if they were listening through a stethoscope, and make clinical diagnoses and decisions just like a doctor would listening through a stethoscope. So we've created our technology Felix and spun out of Johns Hopkins University and are now commercializing the technology and collaborating with different researchers, health systems around the country and around the world.
Amazing. So that around the world is the piece that I want to dig into a little bit more. Since you have the mic, can you start off and just tell us a little bit about how Savani Labs is engaging in global markets, where maybe your largest markets, just some details about that global aspect?
Yeah, sure. So what's really interesting about the Savani Labs company and technology, as I mentioned, we spun out of Johns Hopkins University, and the project started out in response to a Gates Foundation challenge to reduce pediatric mortality as a result of pneumonia. So pneumonia is the leading cause of death in children under 5 around the world, mostly in developing markets. And the problem is that there just isn't enough access or timely access to a prompt diagnosis. So community health workers are going out and screening patients and using World Health Organization guidelines, which are basically about as accurate as flipping a coin. And they are overprescribing antibiotics, missing a lot of cases. And so Dr. James West, who is a world-renowned inventor and acoustician, he is the one who took on the project and worked with the team at Hopkins to create the Felix technology. And they started out doing research in Bangladesh, Malawi, and when we think about kind of that global entry, we really kind of started out looking at a global problem, and that's why a lot of our research was done internationally. And we pivoted to more focus on the U.S. market as the company was being founded, because we realized that while pneumonia is a huge problem in emerging markets, asthma and COPD are just as pervasive here in the U.S. and disproportionately so in Black and brown communities like here in Baltimore. And so when we think about our technology and kind of the work that we're doing, we started out global, trying to solve a global problem, but focused and are now kind of focusing our business in the U.S. market to make sure that we're, addressing issues that are just right here in our own backyard. But we still engage with international markets and are still based in, or still have a presence in Bangladesh, doing research, which is probably, I would say, our largest market. We've started to expand because pneumonia is a huge problem in other places. So we've so far sold devices into Nigeria, South Africa, Lesotho, Peru as well. So we started out with research in mind, and as we are going through the regulatory hurdles that are particular to each individual market, we are doing our best to connect with researchers on the ground to build a presence in that community, in that market first, so that way, as we're going through the process, it can be a little smoother, we can get some more support on our side, get some more kind of wins under our belt.
Absolutely, and I feel like that specifically, the regulatory hurdles is something we hear all the time as a barrier to entry in a lot of places. Absolutely. Can I turn to you to tell us a little bit about how you're globally engaged?
Certainly. So our story is the opposite of his, because we were big in the U.S., and fire departments, if you know, actually it's a little different here because we all know 911, when you call, somebody shows up. Not the same in other parts of the world. Our products are designed to help firefighters respond. Like, for example, we tell them where the closest hydrant is, what the hazards are, et cetera. And U.S. has done a pretty good job with the standard. It's not a law, but it's a standard. And a lot of other countries are adopting that. So we went the other way. Once we were established, 5 years ago or 6 roughly, we won an RFP in Australia. That was our first experience trying to do the international thing. Of course, I've got a lot of help from some of the people in the room, Paul especially, and the Maryland Department of Commerce as well. So I kind of used them to leverage their connections to kind of reach out to, their contacts in other parts of the world. So they helped me connect with those people. So once we got our name out there after our first customer, then now we're actually going the other way, because I think there's more business outside the U.S. for what we do. And in our case, we're doing it like statewide. Like for in Australia, each one's a state. In the U.S., each city has a fire department. In other countries, like they have a countrywide system or a statewide system. From time, effort, and money-wise, revenue-wise, much better to go after those larger deals. So we're more focused on outside the U.S. now, currently.
Awesome. In terms of identifying maybe new markets internationally that you would like to approach, can you tell me a little bit about how you find those targets, and then how you kind of work on getting sales there?
I got a lot of help from the commerce and the commercial service as well, the U.S. commercial service. So I did a trade show with them in Singapore. I went there as a trade delegation. Then I know commerce, the commercial service, I should say, brings I forget what their designations are. Paul can probably explain who they are, but they bring people to you at different shows. So we participated that at a show called FDIC, which is our biggest show, and they came in. They bring prospective buyers basically, and in this case, it was not a fit because they were looking for a Spanish-based product. Language is a big issue around the world, so that's something we don't do. Then also recently, we've engaged with them for an advocacy service where they help us kind of give, basically think of it as your tax dollars at work, because they're helping the U.S. business expose your business to the right people in a very different level that we can get to. So I'm kind of using them for that service as well.
Incredible. I know there are a lot of really great services, and we'll hear about some of those resources, I think, at the last panel. I'm wondering if I can turn to you just to talk a little bit about, similarly, how you identify maybe new markets, or how you did identify new markets outside of the United States, and maybe how you have used e-commerce or digital tools to do that. Yeah,
so we actually participated in the Commercial Services Export Tech Program, which is phenomenal. I recommend anybody who is thinking about engaging in international markets do that program. It is also funded by the state, so you can get a grant to cover a part of the costs for participating in the program. And we use that to first kind of wrap our heads around engaging with international markets. And then as far as the digital tools, Google is absolutely kind of our first space or place to go when it comes to identifying new places. we were able to use some of the tools that we learned about through the Export Tech program, one of which actually helps us identify the specific like the specific countries that export our NAICS code or NAICS code the most, right? So that kind of data helped us really kind of identify markets that were already kind of acquiring and purchasing our device or our technology in large amounts. With that in mind, we also kind of use the, as Sanjay mentioned, the on-the-ground resources to help identify partners, distribution partners that could be helpful to us. Because when you're engaging with an international market, not only is language a barrier, but cultural differences can also be a huge challenge. And it's great to have somebody on the ground who's got some familiarity, who has just relationships on the ground that they can leverage.
Absolutely. And on that, just kind of like on the ground partnerships and that kind of thing, is that something you've ever had issues with kind of identifying those partners in different countries to help leverage that business?
So going to the trade shows is another great way to identify partners, but vetting those partners is where the government services can be very helpful. Having background checks done on people that aren't extremely expensive helps you to make sure that your business is not going to be kind of handed over to nefarious actors. I think that to the other digital tools, communication is really important. So especially as the pandemic kind of changed the way that we engage, we use a lot of Zoom, a lot of Microsoft Teams, a lot of tools that just kind of help us stay organized and communicate across these different markets.
Sanjay, I wonder if you would like to comment any more, just kind of on the piece with like how you identify how you identify markets and the challenges that you've experienced in global trade or in going into these new countries.
So a few years ago, we wanted to explore the UK market. We're an English-based product. We want to look at any English-based. Australia, we had started, so I wanted to look at UK, so I engaged the commercial service to help us with that. And we got some help. They found me a local consultant that helped me identify, the market, like what it looks like. Because for me to go there and find that out, it's very hard. So they did the research. In fact, they gave me the contacts I should talk to and the partners. And also, I believe they connected me with somebody in the embassy as well. So I met with the embassy person also to understand the market. But that was during the last, the politics were a big part of this. First, because we're a U.S. company trying to do a business and take over business of a local product that's already out there. So they gave me a lot of guidance on how to approach the politics that we were going through a few years ago, and also how to target the market that was specific. So we've used local consultants for that.
Can I ask the same question to you, just about if you could point to one or two of the biggest challenges that you have experienced in global trade?
Yeah, I would say probably, okay. It was definitely for us recognizing our own readiness level for specific markets. As I mentioned earlier, the regulatory challenges can be a bit of a mountain to climb, especially because they are different in different countries. And we ran into this challenge where we had a lot of interest and a lot of people coming to us wanting to purchase the technology, wanting to partner with us to distribute. And we had to kind of take a step back because we were excited as a startup, thinking, oh my goodness, we've got the traction, we've got the market fit, we have customers, that people who want to buy the technology. Isn't that what you're looking for? And then it came down to, okay, how can we get the product to these people legally? And that is where, again, a lot of that organization, kind of taking a step back to going through the Export Tech program, helped us to see what were a lot of the things that, items that we needed to check off the list in order to be ready to say yes to those customers. And I think that we certainly spent a lot of time and resources responding as opposed to making very concerted and diligently researched decisions. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
So it's beyond finding the right partner or there's another challenge of making sure your product fits in that market as well. A good example is, in our case, we use miles. Other countries use kilometers. I mean, that's important to us because we have a product that helps the fire truck navigate to a location, and we have to consider the side of the road they're in because we're navigating at this point, the miles versus kilometers, temperature, centigrade versus, all these are important considerations. And is your product ready to do all those things? So jumping into a market is, you can look at a market and go, okay, it's big enough, we can do all these things, but is your product ready to meet their requirements? And can you make the modifications? And that's an important consideration as well.
Absolutely. Can I ask, in your case, is that something that you kind of figured that out on your product end, like making those adjustments before approaching those international markets? Or is that something where you kind of got the traction, you went into that market, got the traction, the interest, and then kind of made the adjustments to the product?
So we knew like some basic things, but you really don't know till you actually get to that point where they're using the product and they tell you it doesn't fit certain things. So we were kind of making the modifications, but that was then. Now we're kind of thinking that ahead. We're thinking ahead of that because anymore we're making it so we can easily adapt to a certain country or requirement, whatever that is. So, because in an RFP, that's the first question. Plus, you're a U.S. product, right? Not when you respond to this, they want to really make sure that you can do what you're telling them you can do. So we make sure when we design our products, we're thinking global in the product itself.
Absolutely. And can I ask, just from your experience and kind of going through these challenges and some of these barriers, is there anything that you wish you knew or something that would be helpful for like a small business who's interested in going into a new market but hasn't done it before, something that could be kind of beneficial? Just anything that you wish you'd known before making that kind of
Certainly.
next step?
I think there's a lot of research required. Jumping into a different country, besides the expense of going there and marketing all these things, you have to make sure you have a future there. Right, and you're establishing a presence in a different country. So I think the resources offered by the commercial service and the state, for example, all those some of them are free. So you should really take advantage of all those services. And even if there's a small fee, they do so much more than what they actually advertise. And we've heavily dependent on those services to get to where we are.
Absolutely. Can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, I have to kind of double down on that because I think research is probably one of the most underestimated tools that a startup or any business can have as you're thinking about engaging in a new market. There is not enough research that you can do. There's always something else that you can find out, whether it's looking at the market from a cultural landscape, from a data, just actual sales, like how much are the products moving, understanding the competition that's in that marketplace and what are some of the challenges that they're experiencing. There's really not enough that you can do to prepare yourself, not too much that you can do to prepare yourself to be able to successfully engage in those marketplaces. And you have to assess your bandwidth as a team and really kind of think about it strategically and logically over what do you envision for the growth of your company, but what can you also do with what you have right now? And are you taking on more than what you would be able to do successfully? Because there's a lot of times as you're building a business, you want to be able to say that you're being successful and show metrics that most businesses would identify as success, like sales, like, units out the door, or what have you. But you have to also kind of think about, as Sanjay mentioned, is your technology ready? Can you fulfill that order? Do you have, the product on hand? Is it ready? Are you ready? So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I know we've touched on some of the government resources a little bit, but I want to ask just the individual question. Just if you could tell us a little bit about the government resources that you have used to help kind of enable some of this success, and just things that you think that other small businesses or startups or people who are just a little bit interested in global markets should consider.
Yeah. I would first start off with the Export MD grant program because that it helps to fund your travel, and not just travel, but your whole it helps to fund your research and your ability to be present in those markets. But as I mentioned earlier, the Export Tech training program, it's Ooh, 12 weeks? I don't. Ooh, you can tell me. I know you remember. It's not a very long program, but it is very helpful in just helping you to understand what are some of the things that you need to do as far as like just putting your checklist in order and preparing yourself for engaging in those markets.
I do agree with him. I've used the state grant as well, the export, the Maryland grant. I've also used the commercial services resources around the world. They've connected me with, like, let's say I was in Singapore, part of Millipore. That was a trade show we did. Then afterwards, worked with the local commercial service person there to help us explore, see if it's a good fit or not. And then most recently, we're working with them to help us with the advocacy program in New Zealand. So yeah, they're helping us in quite a few ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, with the I'm sorry. I also forgot to mention the I think it's called an ICV. It's basically like a background check for any of the partners. The commercial services has people on the ground that can actually vet and meet with potential partners for you, provide a full list and all the contact information that you would need. So they really can kind of do a lot of that groundwork for you. So I would definitely say reach out to take advantage of those services because they're not free, but they are well worth the cost.
Absolutely. And are there any kind of maybe just gaps or things that you would like to see more resources or trainings or kind of promotion programs around? I didn't put that one in the question.
Tough question to answer because we're a niche product, right? I mean, it's like if you don't think about fire department software when you think of technology. So they've actually been pretty good. Once I've known Paul Matino here for a long time, and he is kind of the one that's looking out for us. And he sent me information that you should attend this or you should go see this, very specific to our segment. But it's something that we have to do and then go and ask them, can you help us with this? That's what we've been doing.
And I think I was thinking like kind of more generally, not calling out the U.S. Commercial Service. They have amazing services, but just in looking more broadly, like we know there are a lot of like digital tools out there, and there are kind of from a lot of those different digital providers, there are kind of like training programs and that kind of thing to help with the exports. And Google's like Market Finder is amazing. And just looking at kind of the private sector resources and the public sector resources, is there anything that kind of like in your journey globally that you just have looked for and it hasn't been there? And if not, that's amazing.
I can't think of anything.
Perfect.
So, I don't. I'm gonna speak a little bit selfishly, but from the Sanavi Labs perspective. But I would say, funding is one of those things that we are always trying to kind of wrap our heads around. And so I think the more resources that are there to support. Not just like the Export MD grant program that like puts cash in our pocket to go, but I guess kind of support that helps us with engaging in those markets from a venture perspective, because kind of scaling into new markets is a whole different beast from actually just kind of having a presence there. And I think that there could be, I guess, more resources that connect founders with venture capital or other funding sources, even if it's non-dilutive funding. Like if there's grant funding that a particular country is offering to, facilitate a new technology or a new development, that I think could be helpful.
No, and I speak with a lot of small businesses, and when I ask them about just like the challenges in business or even going global, almost every single time the thing at the top of the list is money. It's access to capital. It's how can we get more? But for this portion of our session, we are about out of time. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us and for sharing these insights. I think it's incredible for small businesses to hear from folks who have done it. So
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you for
it.
having us.
Yes, and then we have another panel who I will ask to come join me up here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Nice job.
Thank you. Yeah. Can I hand you that?
Yes.
panel is the value of early attention to compliance with regulations. So we are bringing you three legal experts who can share some strategies and advice on how to protect your intellectual property and just discuss some key legal and regulatory considerations for small businesses and global expansion. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by Raquel Cohen, the Senior IP and Trade Policy Attorney at the International Trade Administration within the U.S. Department of Commerce. Nicholas Hawkins, Associate at Womble, Bond & Dickinson, and Meg Watkins, Senior Compliance Counsel at Bed Bath & Beyond. So thank you very much, all three of you, for being with us today. I'd just like to ask if we can start off with just a brief introduction of your organization, your role, and kind of how what you do, how it can help small businesses, or how that issue area helps small businesses in their global expansion.
Sounds good. Welcome. My name is Raquel Cohen. I am a trade attorney and trademark attorney at the U.S. Department of Commerce based in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to be here in person and to see faces versus over Zoom, and also via Zoom too. So our office works primarily with small and medium businesses, large corporations as well, in assisting them on assessing what is in their IP portfolio. We'll get into that a little bit later, and in assisting companies in exporting too. So we're part of the International Trade Administration, so we want to promote exports and expanding U.S. businesses and innovation, but to also do that in an intelligent and smart way. And on the flip side of that, after the education piece, we also assist companies when they encounter infringements as well. So if they have issues with someone copying their design or their patent online in an online marketplace or in person, and a marketplace, a foreign market, we provide guidance on how to remedy that issue. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Raquel. Hey, everyone. My name is Nick Hawkins. I'm an attorney at Womble, Bond Dickinson. And my practice is a little unholy match between intellectual property and also corporate and securities. So on the IP side, I do a lot with what Raquel does as well. So that's trademark, copyright, both enforcement and brand kind of guidance for a lot of startups and big companies as well. And then on the corporate and security side, I do a lot with board governance, corporate governance, financial transactions, M&A, what have you. And again, that's also for startups as well and also for larger companies.
Hi, I'm Meg Watkins. I currently am at Bed Bath, where I run the compliance program there for our own brand products. Prior to that, I was at Under Armour for 14 years, where I was in charge of their global compliance for all products. And, you know, we like to think we were a startup for years and years and years. But we also created products that were in what we call white spaces, like the mask we made. And so those were products where there weren't any standards. When we were making our cloth masks, there were no standards at all. And so I had to work to try to figure out how to advertise it, how to package it, what it actually had to be comprised of in order to sell it globally, because we were everywhere with that. So that's my experience.
Perfect. Thank you for laying the foundation for this discussion. I want to start off with Raquel in just a second. I think a lot of these issues can seem like pretty intimidating for small businesses, but they're obviously incredibly important. So maybe just starting with the basics, if you could tell us a little bit about like what intellectual property is to start with, and how small businesses should kind of consider it.
Great. So that's a great question. Our companies that come to us usually are unaware of what consists of IP, and they trade off these names: copyright, trademark, trade secrets, patents. And they're all very critical, but they're all very different. So what I like to call it is the IP umbrella. And within that umbrella of intellectual property, you have copyrights, which are creations, works of art regarding writings. It could be for a company, it could be a picture on a website. It could be an instruction manual. It can actually be software too, and the data on the software, the way it's encrypted too. The nuances of how each is protected is very country specific, so that would be something we can explore later on. I also like to make a plug for our U.S. government website, stopfakes.gov. It actually goes into very good detail on how to assess, what your different intellectual properties are, your patents, your trademarks, your trade secrets. Moving along, you also have a patent, which is an innovation for a process, for a method of doing a procedure. Some famous patents that you may be aware of would be an Amazon patent, would be on a click feature, where you click to buy. That's a patent too. And also you can have a trade secret, which is somewhat interchangeable with a patent. And a trade secret could also be the secret sauce of your company. It could be the manufacturing process too, of how to produce something. That's protected by keeping the secret within the company, and there's many other steps that are court assessed if you ever have an issue with enforcing your trademark or trade secret. And a trademark is probably the most popular issue that we see in our office. So we advise U.S. companies on how to protect their U.S. brand in the U.S. first. That would be their tagline. So Nike's "Just Do It" is very famous. It could be the actual company name itself, so Nike. And we also advise companies on when they go abroad and they're about to explore different markets, for example, in China, whether to translate their trademark into the local language or to assess whether consumers in that marketplace, whether they have interpreted the trademark in a different brand or name as well too. So there's different categories on how to protect your trademark, and it gets more complicated too about first in use versus first to file too. So we provide all those legal steps and guidance along the way to US companies.
Awesome, thank you. I feel like I definitely just learned something. Thanks for differentiating those terms. But I think that kind of brings us then to the question of when. So when to seek IP protection. So I want to see if I can turn to Nicholas and just ask, what are some of the factors to consider that small businesses should consider in terms of deciding where to seek intellectual property protection?
So first, I must say that I got to watch what I say up here because Meg is my former boss from Under Armour, and if I say anything wrong, she might slap me upside the head, so I'll be careful. The question of when is actually a really great question. I think a lot of startups, they are so focused on the business, right, and driving profits and getting funding, which is really, really, really important. But it's also really important to protect what you've created, right? So the question of when, from my point of view, is as early as possible. Okay, and if you don't have the funding for that, that's a conversation that you can still have with an attorney anyway, because there might be some arrangements that can be made. There are nonprofit organizations out there that provide pro bono legal services for startups and things like that. But the question of when is really as early as possible. When it comes to something like patents, you have a 1-year bar, okay, from the time you pretty much put that patent out there in the universe to file a patent application. And we call it the first sale, right? And if you don't do it within that year, of course, there's some things involved with that. But if you don't do it within that year, you might be barred from filing a patent on that, right? From a trademark perspective, we are a first to use in the United States, first to use jurisdiction, which means that you do not have to file a patent, trademark application to protect that trademark. However, there are a whole bunch of benefits, which I won't go into with you now, but there are a whole bunch of benefits for filing federally a trademark application. You can continue to just use your trademark without filing it, but let's say someone else files a similar trademark or that same trademark application on the Federal Register, and you don't have a federal trademark application. That could prevent some issues for you down the road. Same thing with copyrights. You created it first. That's copyright. That's protected. It's like $50. It's really cheap, right? So I'd say as soon as possible is about the time to do it. From an international perspective, right? We're just talking about U.S. From an international perspective, you really want to do it when you start thinking about what to do internationally, right? If you are just based in the U.S., but you're manufacturing in China, let's say, right? Which for many reasons is crazy when it comes to intellectual property infringements, lack of protection, I will say. You want to think about filing trademark applications in China. When I think about patenting in China, even though you might not be actually in China necessarily, if you were working with a manufacturer there without really strong contracts, and even then that doesn't quite protect you, you might want to think about protecting your IP there. And the same goes with any other jurisdiction. So from my perspective, I think the answer to your question succinctly is as soon as possible.
That's a great answer. And then Meg, kind of along the same lines of starting with the basics, can you share just what is global compliance and why it should matter to small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question. So global compliance comprises everything if you're selling a product, right? It's how's the product made, what's the product made with? You've got conflict mineral issues, potentially. You've got cotton made in parts of China with Uyghur labor. I mean, you've got how you're packaging the product, what language you're putting on the package. When you're going internationally, you want to speak, even if it's not required, and in Europe it is required, but in a lot of countries it's not. You can use English. Speak to the people in their language, please. Like, I hate that. But you want to look at the packaging. What does it have to say? Does it have to say how many products are in the package? Do you have to include the content on the package, or can it just be on the product itself? You have to look at marketing. In China, for example, you cannot use a superlative. You cannot say the greatest. You will get in all sorts of trouble if you do that. Well, I know this from experience. So you can't do it. So you have to be really careful. You have to figure out how you're going to get a product from where it's been made to where you're going to sell it. You have to figure out, right now in Europe in particular, there are a lot of new regulations about recycling, package recycling. There's a Green Dot program in Germany. If you're selling a product that's in plastic packaging, you have to pay up front. You, the seller of the manufacturer, has to pay up front the cost of recycling the packaging. Same in the UK. We're getting there in the US. It's taking a long time, but we're going to get there, hopefully. There's just myriad of things that you have to think about. Just everything that touches the product, and think about, but packaging in particular, marketing your product, and if there is packaging, how that packaging is disposed of, all of that needs to come into your calculations.
Maybe just a follow-up quickly to help kind of zone in the global compliance piece. Could you identify like one or two of the kind of key challenges that you see small businesses potentially experiencing in that realm?
Sure. If you are capturing people's personal information in any way, shape, or form, address, phone number, anything that would comprise personal information, you've got to deal with GDPR in Europe, which is their privacy legislation. I don't know much about it. Like, there are lots of groups that handle it. It's very specific, but you need to make sure you're like, if you're keeping people's addresses and credit cards, right, so that they can sell you, they can buy more products from you. You have to save it in a specific way in Europe. There are the same types of issues now, privacy in the U.S. That's a big one. What's another? Probably packaging. Like what actually has to be on the packaging of the product you're selling. Like, generally it's content. Generally it's size, it's weight, it's and in different languages. Like, all the different languages. And there are websites where you can go find this. This is not something I just know. I've done this for 20 years. I look online every single time. I go online and I see, okay, Argentina requires that you put this in Portuguese. Like, I have to look it up. I don't know. Nobody knows. It's even if you hire a lawyer, they're going to do the exact same thing you can do by yourself. Like, honestly, there's sometimes you want to hire a lawyer. If you're going to Asia, hire a lawyer. But for a lot of it, you can find it online, and you're going to do the same thing the lawyers are doing. You're just going to do it for free.
Wonderful, thank you. Raquel, I wonder if I can turn to you, kind of piggybacking off of the challenges piece. Could you share a couple of key challenges that you see small businesses experiencing in the IP realm?
Yes. So building on what we discussed earlier with my colleague here about going to Asia and manufacturing in Asia, a lot of U.S. companies can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. A lot of companies are unaware of their exposure in Asia and that connection to protecting their IP. We would call that a defensive IP strategy. So for example, if you are producing a component or a widget in China and you think that you really don't have any contact or customer base in China, it's probably not a correct guess of how your business is being exposed, meaning that any form of business transaction, whether it's with a joint venture in China, whether that's manufacturing a widget piece within your larger product in China, or even an online market presence in the US, and you can sense a growing increase in consumers in China, for example, even if it's 10%, 12%, our office would advise you seek trademark protection, at least at the minimum in China, to protect as an offensive strategy in case there is a third-party bad actor who comes after your product. It could be the cousin of the manufacturer in Shanghai or another region of Guangzhou in China, and they're on to the popularity of your product, which is very common in China, and then you have very limited IP resources on how to remedy your situation. So that would be the short answer to your question. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And then Nicholas, I know your portfolio goes beyond IP as well. I wonder if you either want to add to some of the key considerations that small businesses should be thinking about in terms of IP, or if there are any other just kind of like legal components, if you could identify a couple of those.
Sure, I'd be happy to. One of the top things that comes to mind, and I am not a tax attorney, nor do I play one on TV, but is taxes, okay? And if you are selling products internationally, if you are selling or offering services internationally, you really need an accounting firm that understands kind of international areas and jurisdictions and how that plays a part, so that you make sure that you're paying your taxes locally in those jurisdictions as necessary. One of the other things that I thought about too is if you are a US company, and we all want funding, right? We all want money because we are startups and we get it. But you want to make sure that if you are getting funds from outside of the United States, that is funds from other countries, that those funds don't trigger any CFIUS concerns. Now, CFIUS stands for the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, okay? And that committee from the Department of Treasury is regulated, or is tasked with rather, by making sure that foreign investments do not pose any threats to U.S. companies, okay? Now, there was a time period where it was kind of you elect to tell them, and you have a safe harbor if they reviewed it and you were fine. Now it's pretty much you must. So if you're getting any kind of investment, or if you're merging with or being acquired by a foreign entity, you want to make sure that doesn't trigger any CFIUS concerns. And that's something that a lawyer can definitely help you with. Most bigger law firms have that kind of capacity, and it's just a conversation to make sure that that doesn't trigger any concerns.
Awesome, thank you. Meg, I wonder, you mentioned earlier a couple just like Googling things. I wonder if any resources online or otherwise that you would point small businesses to in terms of like trying to identify some of the global compliance issues. And if not...
I've been trying to think of any. Your trade groups might have compilations of information. There's the American Association of Footwear and Apparel, and they have a compilation of all of the, or at least as of like current, as of 6 months ago, of all of the different labeling regulations, et cetera. And I can't tell you for sure, but I would imagine that a number of the trade organizations have that type of information. I would also, and I'm not sure that Raquel and Nick would agree with me, but I would tell you that at least in Europe and in South America, you don't let perfect be the enemy of good on this. You want to get it right, of course. Choose the country or countries that are the most strict. In Europe, that's going to be the northern country. France, Germany, and some of the Scandinavian countries are the strictest in general, right? Choose one or two of them. Get it right for them. You're very likely to have it right for Europe. And the same, Mexico, Brazil... there are a couple of countries in South America, in Central America you want to get. But if you get those right, you're going to have it basically right. And I've gotten it wrong in doing my job. Sometimes it happens. And what I have found is that if, when someone comes to you and says, this isn't right, you need to do this. If you say, I'm so sorry, here's my plan to fix it. I'm going to fix it as quickly as possible. I'm going to do this moving on. People want to work with you. They want your business. Other countries want your business. They want the products you have. You have products they don't have. They want them. So they are generally willing to work with you. In Europe, one thing I was surprised by when we were doing the mask is we could go to the government regulatory agencies in different countries and say, here's what we're proposing to sell. And this is how it's going to be comprised, and it's going to have, this and this. Would it be okay if we labeled it this way? And we had like 5 different countries. The government agencies would give us it's called an anonymous opinion, and they would give it to us. And they would say, no, you have to do it this way, or yes, this looks fine. And that's free. And it's a hugely valuable resource. Countries want to work with you. Or a lot of countries do. Not every country, so I shouldn't make a blanket statement. But a lot of countries do want your product, and they want to help you. So do your best, do your research, hire your tax attorney, but get it out there too, right? You can't just keep researching. Get the product out there, because people will work with you and help you.
Incredible, thank you. So we're coming up at the, I think, end of our time. I want to give each of you an opportunity, though, to just give any parting pieces of advice or resources that you think could be beneficial for small businesses. Maybe we start with Raquel at the end, but just kind of resources or just parting pieces of advice for small businesses.
So I love to give takeaway messages, and I think the biggest takeaway since the pandemic has been the uptick in e-commerce and selling online. So with that, the biggest issue that we see in our office is companies coming to us about takedown policies and procedures, meaning how do I take down an offender or a bad actor on an online marketplace like Amazon or like Alibaba. Those are the more well-known marketplaces. There's also other ones, of course, too. So with that, what I would say is, one is to take a look at a U.S. government resource called the Notorious Markets List Report. I actually manage that for my agency for the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's called Notorious Markets List Report. We produce a report every year. Usually comes out, supposed to be by Black Friday, usually a little bit later, like in January. And we work with other agencies, including Customs, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the White House. And the goal of this report is to increase the effectiveness of the ecosystem on the online marketplace for U.S. companies, meaning for brands and for consumers. So how to work with different websites and what's working. For example, is Alibaba favoring large corporations and taking down trademark infringements from their website? Or are they working also with SMEs who have less resources on finding these bad actors on their website? So that's the first resource I would also give you. The other issue, or the other resource I would look at, is to go on stopfakes.gov. We also provide a lot of webinars and good resources on how to use your IP and your trademarks to effectively go after these bad actors on these online marketplaces, and to always be vigilant. We work with all these different platforms to improve their communication to small and medium businesses and to large corporations, and to improve their resources so it works better for everybody. So I think paying attention to the online marketplace, it seems like it's a never-ending issue of whack-a-mole and going after the bad actors, but I encourage you to be diligent and to monitor your IP and your brand on these marketplaces. Mm-hmm.
Awesome, thank you. Nicholas?
Sure, I would say what stands to mind is just be proactive. I think a lot of startups, again, they're so focused on the business, and they should be, that they forget about kind of the legal and compliance and regulatory concerns. And the last thing that you want is to create this awesome product or have this awesome service, then all of a sudden have some lawyer come in and be like, you did it wrong, or you didn't do it the right way. Allow legal to be your friend. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And Meg and I being the lawyers inside a company, and Meg still at a company, sometimes legal is not the friend of like the marketing team or the product team or the brand team. But as a startup, you need to work alongside your legal providers, your financial providers, your tax providers, your accountants. You need to work alongside your board, alongside your the people who are there to help to support you, your mentors, your advisors. We're all here together to kind of help make it work for you and your baby, which is your business, right? And so I think that being proactive, bringing in people as early as possible is very important. I'm happy to speak with anyone in this room on YouTube or whatever. Just one-on-one conversation, that's fine. And, Nick, I have this question, or, I think any of us are. We have this question, what do you think? I'm kind of point you in the right direction and get you started, but involve people who are there to kind of help you and guide you through that process in as early as possible.
I think I gave mine already, which was don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I would also just, if you can't find online resources, one thing, honestly, I think a lot of in-house counsel at least do is look at what your competitors are doing. What else is someone else doing? How are they packaging product? How are they marketing product? What are they saying? What are they not saying? If you take a sample of 3, you probably know how to do it. The information is out there. Do your best. Listen to your advisors. They know what they're talking about, and get it out there, and then protect it.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I think all 3 of you did an amazing job of just making some kind of scary or potentially intimidating issues seem more approachable and just kind of attainable. So I appreciate that. I know I learned a lot. But I think we are at the end of our time, so we're going to turn to our next panel, which is going to be some resources to help you go global. So thank you.
We're going to go ahead and get started. This is our final panel of the day, so we're just blowing through this, but there's been so much great information changed, and I know this panel is going to be no different. So my name is Tricia Van Orden. I'm with the U.S. Department of Commerce. You've had heard from a couple commerce colleagues today, and we're, of course, here to support your small business, your startup, or whether you're a solopreneur. We have tools and resources to help you go global, so I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. And I'm excited here to have 3 excellent partners from the Baltimore and broader Maryland export ecosystem to talk about tools and resources to help you go global. So I've got Rebecca Bellinger with me. She's the Executive Director for the Center for Global Business at the University of Maryland Smith School of Business. Paul Matino, who is a Senior International Trade Specialist at the U.S. Commercial Service in Baltimore, my colleague here, our Department of Commerce presence here in Baltimore. And then Andrew Krenek, who's a Senior Manager in the Office of International Investment and Trade for the Maryland Department of Commerce. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And we're going to kick off the panel. If you could just tell us a little bit about your organization and what it is you have to offer small businesses looking to go global. Rebecca, I'll go ahead and start with you.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. Good afternoon, Baltimore. So we at the Center for Global Business are part of this international business ecosystem, not just because we are training the students that I hope you all are hiring, but also because we offer programs and services, direct service to small, medium-sized enterprises in Maryland, as well as early-stage companies. I'll give just a couple of examples of what those are. The first being export education or executive education. Prior to this panel, there was a session on negotiating across borders. That is one example of executive education that we offer. We also do blockchain, global business resilience, et cetera, et cetera. We also offer these kinds of executive trainings to the startup community through a partnership with Ventures, including things like IP protection, et cetera, et cetera. Beyond that, we also offer programs, direct service programs, such as a global consulting program and an internship program where we will match small companies in Maryland, early stage companies as well, with the very talented students at the Smith School to help you with marketing plans, e-commerce, social media marketing, and a lot of that research that some of our colleagues in the previous panel mentioned is so crucial to knowing how to go global. The last thing that I'll mention is the Maryland Business Adapts Award. It's an annual award where we will recognize and work with 5 Maryland companies for their resilience. So that's another product or service that we offer to the community.
Thanks, Rebecca. Great to be here. So I am Paul Matina with the U.S. Commercial Service. U.S. Commercial Service is part of the International Trade Administration. You see a couple of my colleagues here, Raquel and Tricia. The U.S. Commercial Service is the lead trade promotion, or the International Trade Administration is the lead trade promotion agency for the U.S. government. The U.S. Commercial Service is really the fun part, right? We don't write or enforce rules. Our mission is to help companies grow sales overseas. So what do? Really everything, right? From helping companies identify markets to finding customers and then making the sale. So there's a lot to get into. If you take away one thing from my presentation today, trade.gov. Everything I'm going to talk about today is on that site. You might remember the old site, export.gov. The trade.gov site is better, newer, faster, has tons of information on there, lots of resources and contacts. But really, if you're getting inquiries from overseas, if you're traveling overseas for business, if you're going to do a demo, anything like that, think about the U.S. Commercial Service. We're really a partner here to help, and I'll get into more later. Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Kreinig from the Maryland Department of Commerce, Office of International Investment and Trade. I'm also part of the fun group. I always like to come after the legal group because the legal group scares the crap out of everybody, and then we end up on an up note. So we have lots of programs that assist exporters. We have the grant program that I know Sanjay talked about earlier. We have programs that allow you to work with consultants at 16 centers around the world, and you get 20 to 40 hours of free consulting services from those consultants. They can do everything from market research to finding you a distributor to doing reputational analysis. They can do all sorts of research on your behalf. So, anyone who's interested in any kind of consulting assistance, please contact me. We also have programs that we design not just for exporting. We do bring people to trade shows. We bring people to about 7 or 8 trade shows a year. It's generally pretty much free for the space. Sometimes there is a deposit, a non-refundable deposit that you have to put down because we do get a lot of requests, so we have to ask for a deposit. But what we do is we arrange for all sorts of networking assistance at these trade shows, as well as providing the free space. There are lots of programs that we have for exporters. We also work with foreign direct investment to help bring companies over that are interested in locating in the U.S. We help them locate in Maryland.
All right, thanks so much for those overviews of your organization. So I think one of the challenges when startups are first getting into business and looking to go global is sometimes they just don't have the people to do the work. And so, Rebecca, you've already mentioned the network of students. Andrew, you mentioned the network of international consultants. Paul, I know you have networks to talk about too. So could you expand a little bit on those networks? How can we think about startups really outsourcing their global growth plans to the networks that you can bring to them to add value to that growth phase?
Okay, starting with me, I guess. One of the things that I'll say is that you should think about your network as both peer networks, so other successful exporters that are here located locally. One organization that we haven't talked about yet, but I will because I'm a member, is the District Export Council. This is a peer network, again, of experienced exporters that are here to help Maryland companies. So if there is a question you want to know, I don't know, you're having a problem with a distributor, you can't get paid by one of your customers, this is a great network to tap into. It's an email away. We also offer all sorts of programming and networking opportunities, and really the way to engage is to show up. Showing up to this kind of program is I think the first step to expanding that network, and then taking advantage of some of the programs that we all offer, and especially the student network, and not just at the Smith School at College Park, but also the great network of students that are here in the state.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much for mentioning the deck. I was going to mention that. The deck is just an amazing resource. Like Rebecca mentioned, CEOs and executives of Maryland-based firms that are working internationally that want to give back and want to help with any questions you might have as you're getting started or working internationally. So that's a great resource. So the the International Trade Administration, the U.S. Commercial Service, so around 1,400 people all across the United States, people like myself, and then in about 80 countries overseas. So we are the commercial section of the U.S. embassies. We are organized by industry, so we have experts in virtually every industry. And so in the tech space, we have people, in the largest markets in the world that come from industry, that have relationships. They know the market conditions, and they can help with those initial questions, right? Should I spend a time quoting? What is my kind of competitive position here? What is fill in the blank, whatever it is. But so there's a lot of experts. In addition to my colleague that you met here today, we have lawyers. We have all kinds of industry experts at our HQ in Washington. So. There's no stupid question, right? There's tons of help, and I think the easiest way is to just reach out. And it doesn't matter where you reach out. If you call Rebecca and it's a question that's more for the U.S. Commercial Service, she'll funnel it Andrew, vice versa. We all work together.
Yeah, we do quite a bit of networking. If you're at a trade show, for instance, we work with not only our consultants, but we have a lot of international partners overseas. We have memorandums of understandings with a lot of different regions of the world. So when we go to those trade shows, we create networking events with those regions. We also host a lot of delegations that come into Maryland to check Maryland out. We create networking events for those specific delegations. When we bring delegations overseas, not just to trade shows, but should there be an opportunity to have us bring a delegation over, it's all about networking. We know that the principal reason that a business wants to go international is for business. And so that's what our focus is on helping companies get as many networks, getting as many contacts as possible so they can expand their business. And you actually have a very good example who spoke earlier, Sanjay. He grew because he went international. He had a hard time growing domestically, but the reason why he grew was he went international, and because there's kind of a myth that innovation is accepted immediately here in the US. It's not. It's actually, in my experience, I have found that innovation is accepted outside the U.S. more quickly than in the U.S. So Sanjay was able to take advantage of that in Australia because they recognized that his innovation was quite useful.
Thank you all so much. It's great to have these resources in your corner, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Like, if you want to know them, then they definitely want to know you. We heard this reference in an earlier panel, access to capital being one of the biggest challenges that companies face. So I was wondering if you can detail some of the financial programs. They're all pointed at Andrew. Not only is he the fun guy, he's also the fund guy. So what financial programs and grants are available to minimize the cost of growing a business through international expansion?
Yeah, I'm the money guy too. What we have is we have the Export MD grant. Now, you can be reimbursed. It's a reimbursement grant, a 2/3 reimbursement grant. So you have to spend a total of $7,500 in order to get $5,000 back. But what does that cover? Let's say you're going to a trade show and you need to get space at a trade show. It can reimburse for the space of the trade show. It can reimburse for travel expenses. It can reimburse for if you need to internationalize your website. It can pay for that. It can pay for translation of your marketing materials. There's a lot that is covered under the Export MD grant. We also help pay for a lot of U.S. Commercial Service products. For instance, the Gold Key program, which I'm sure that Paul is going to talk about. We will reimburse 2/3 of the expense of that. There are other programs that U.S. Commercial Service has that will also pay for those. We also, University of Maryland has the Global Consulting Program. We pay for that. So there's a lot of resources, financial resources that you can tap into, and because our belief is that SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, in order to get started overseas, need to have some kind of injection and assistance, financial assistance, to help them grow.
Yeah, that is well said, Andrew. I mean, growing globally, like, you do need to make an investment into your company to make that pay off, and so it's good to have those resources to help offset the costs. Paul, since you're here kind of representing the federal side of things, can you speak very briefly on the other financial services, SBA and XM? Just highlight quickly how to offset risk, or, you know, export working capital loans, just the fact that there's other financial products people could explore.
Sure. So if you haven't already talked to someone from the SBA, you should. They have a lot of great programs to help make it more incentivize banks to lend to U.S. companies that are working overseas by underwriting the loan. And they can also help you navigate to one of these lenders. They have an approved list. We have someone in our office that is an international trade loan officer that can help. So they have a lot of great resources. They don't do direct lending on the international side, but they underwrite the loans that the banks provide. Export-Import Bank is great too. They have a lot of programs, export credit insurance for companies that are looking to mitigate default risk, can apply for various insurance. They're private lenders as well, but Export-Import Bank has some great programs.
No, I appreciate that. I think getting paid is something that we all are concerned about, and so XM, again, can help to offset some of that risk. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next question. We also heard in our last panel the rise of e-commerce. Obviously, we were doing so much more stuff at home, and buying things is part of that, and that is a worldwide phenomenon. Can you guys maybe highlight a few useful tools or strategies to help companies reach global customers online and optimize their digital operations?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Let me just point out, if you are online, you're already an international company because there's access to you from all around the world. Actually, in terms of internationalizing your website, we turn to the U.S. Commercial Service, and Paul will explain about their service for internationalizing a website. But really, you need to focus on which market do you want to reach and what are the language abilities in those markets. If you think English is the only language, you're wrong. So you may want to consider, do I need to translate my website and my marketing materials into, let's say, Spanish, French, Chinese, whatever. But in order to reach markets, you do need to be able to have your website translated. Also, remember that in the US, we use the imperial measuring system. We do not use the metric system. And the rest of the world does not understand our measures. So that's one thing you're going to have to make sure that you change, is so that everyone can understand quantities and distances.
My colleague Raquel mentioned the Take Down Notorious Markets List report. I haven't checked it out, but I would encourage everybody to check that out. I thought that was a neat resource. You know, the first thing anybody does, you hand them a business card, what do? They pull up your website, right? And if it's a potential international customer, your website needs to convey that you're looking to work internationally. And a lot of, not just startups, but a lot of companies that are focused on the U.S. market don't take those things into account. The good news is there's money from the state of Maryland to help revamp your site, retool, or even create a new one. And we have a SWOT analysis report that we can offer for around $100. It's pretty cheap. It'll kind of like look at your site from an international perspective and offer you some technical as well as qualitative suggestions that you can hand to your web development team or contractor, or in-house, out-house, doesn't matter. And then you can reimburse that up to a certain amount through the state of Maryland. So those are some great resources. We have a kind of a think tanky unit called our e-commerce innovation lab that produces a lot of great material. Again, on trade.gov, if you Google trade.gov and e-commerce innovation lab, you'll pull it up. It's kind of like our think tank dedicated to providing resources for companies that are looking to sell online. And as I'm glad you said that, if you have a website, you're selling, even if you don't think you are. So they can offer a lot of tools and resources for helping to capture more customers, and also understanding who's visiting your site, right? Maybe there's customers that you didn't even know about based on web traffic.
So I won't reiterate too much about a website, right? So internationalization or even localization. But I will offer two other things. Is a lot of times we think about selling through our own websites, but let's not forget about platforms and the power of platforms. We all know Amazon, Shopify, but globally in other markets, European markets, the China market, for example, there are other platforms that bring together buyers and sellers, either B2B or B2C, and those are also valuable tools. So think outside of Amazon. If you're looking at China, think JD.com. Not that I'm promoting that in any way. So that's one thing, is the power of platforms. The other thing I'll share is that I just read this morning, actually, and I can't remember the source, but if you're interested, connect with me and we'll find it. But there was a report that came out that said something like 38% of online shoppers, so either corporate, corporate or individual shoppers, will abandon their online carts when they get to the shipping options, because sometimes international shipping options are not available. So I think a big takeaway here is have international shipping options, and even beyond that is to negotiate good prices with whoever your shipping solutions or shipping carrier might be, so that it is advantageous for your international customers to purchase from you and not your competitor.
I actually have one more comment to make about e-commerce. And that is make sure you constantly update your website so that it looks current. I had a client, he had customers in the Middle East for 30 years, and suddenly he started to lose his customers. Why? It's because there was a new generation that was coming into business, and they looked at his website and they said, who is this person? He's ancient. Once he started to update his website, the business came back. So make sure you have a current website. The other thing is, I know this is going to sound funny, but I've had clients that say, I don't export. I will ask them, do you sell to Canada? And they say yes. And I remind them that if you sell to Canada, you are exporting.
Thank you all. There's so many small things you can do to indicate to global customers that you export just by using your website. Even a banner at the top of your website that says, we ship worldwide. It's something as simple as that can be the first step to help people know that they can get a product or a service from you. Okay, we are going to wrap up. This is my final question. So one of the goals of this is to learn from others. We heard great stories in our opening panel, but there's really no reason to have pitfalls or mistakes when you're exporting, because you can call upon all of these excellent resources. So I want to ask you if you can maybe just highlight, what is the top challenge you see when you're working with startups and small businesses going global, and what can small businesses do to avoid that challenge?
The biggest challenge I have is the fear factor, particularly in getting paid, because they don't know how they're going to get paid. And many times they'll ask for upfront payment, which can really kill the business. So what we do is we direct them to services like XM Bank, where they can get credit insurance, so their invoices can be insured. That's one of the biggest things, is the fear of not being paid.
And that's a big one, especially with the global pandemic and companies that are selling to public sector, to governments, and funds being diverted due to the pandemic. And so we've seen a lot of that getting paid. Another thing that I would add would be kind of being a victim of your own success, right? You have this great product, you've innovated it, people know about it, it's generating buzz, and now you're getting a lot of inquiries. And how do you decipher which ones are real, which ones are good, where to devote time? So I think getting strategic, it's critical, just like in any other aspect of the business, also with international. Sanjay and Brandon earlier mentioned I think it was Brandon that mentioned Export Tech, right? So that's a program that we offer. It's a national program. We offer it in Maryland every year or two. If you see that come around and you're interested in international, I would strongly encourage you to have a discussion with us. So it's a program that kind of through over 12 weeks helps you identify where your markets, go through and really put some thought into what makes a good market, and then develop a strategy for it. So I think slowing down sometimes, turning away certain opportunities for the right ones, so that you can grow, like Brandon was saying. You don't want to grow too fast and burn out, but really taking the time to make sure that you're executing your goals.
And I would just add and really reiterate what Paul was talking about having a strategy. So many times we hear about accidental exporters who just pursue a market because, I don't know, the CEO just got back from a fantastic vacation in Germany and they dream about seeing their product on the shelves in Germany. That might not be the best, product market fit. So I think that having a strategy, doing your research, and it's not just about the research about the international market, but it's also about knowing your own product and knowing how far the gap is or how wide the gap is between what is needed in that market and wanted in that market and how to sell in that market, what resonates, and what your product actually is, how it sells, how it fits into the U.S. market here. Because what sells here and how it sells is not always how it sells abroad. So again, I go back to doing your research and actually having a strategy.
I want to thank you all so much for your time and for being part of this panel today. I think all of our speakers imparted so much wisdom and so much guidance. And the thing is, they're going to continue to be available to you. So if you want to learn more, please do reach out and get in touch. All of these resources are in your local community and available to you at any time. So with that, I'm going to give you guys a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining. And Paul, I'll turn it over to you to wrap things up.
Well, thank you to all the panelists. This was great. I hope you enjoyed all the resources that were shared with you. A lot of great resources. And what I'm going to do is I'll provide the ETC here a document with all the resources, and then again for our resources, the trade.gov site. Lastly, just to leave you with this, we're going to be running a great program on November 3rd. For new exporters as well as for experienced exporters. There's some flyers there on our table back there, so if you're interested, please grab one. And so thanks again for everybody who joined online and in person, and this concludes our panel. Thanks, everybody.